Hello, welcome back, and it's a pleasure to be with you. Again, I'm Dr. Mark Sandoval, and today we're going to be looking at what I didn't learn in medical school. Here we have the example of a tree, and a tree can tell us a number of things about ourselves. In fact, when you walk up to a tree, what's the first thing that you notice? Well, you might notice the shape, you might notice the color. A lot of times we notice the leaves, and if it's spring or producing season, summer or fall, then you might notice the fruit. And the fruit and the leaves are quite prominent, and so it's something that we notice quite easily. And so the fruit and the leaves are going to represent something. So here we have a case where the tree has some bad fruit and some bad leaves. And that's going to represent symptoms. So we have some symptoms. Maybe the symptoms are pain or cough or itching or sore throat or runny nose or something of that nature. When you have symptoms, you know you have symptoms. It's obvious when you have pain and when you're coughing and so on. Now, what do we usually do in order to treat symptoms? Well, what we usually do to treat symptoms is take some medication. You might have heard the phrase, there is a pill for every ill. And whether that pill is from a pharmaceutical standpoint, or whether that pill is from a nutraceutical standpoint, or a supplemental standpoint, whether you get it from a pharmacy or you get it from a health food store, we tend to have some kind of pill for every ill. Now let's say that you have back pain. And you've got that back pain and it's right there in the center of your back. And it came on suddenly, it is sharp and stabbing, it's right there between your shoulder blades. You can't sleep at night because it's so uncomfortable, and oh man, it's really bothering you, and oh, it's really painful, and you can't lay on your back, and it's just, And so it's about 2 o'clock in the morning. And you decide that, I've got to get this taken care of. Now, you've tried some over-the-counter pain medication. No, it's not really working. And so you end up going to the emergency department. So it's midnight or 2 o'clock in the morning, and you go to the emergency department so that you can get some pain medication, some treatment, something for this back pain. And you go there, and they just happen to have a major accident that happened, and they're swamped with traumas and all that kind of stuff, and they just have somebody in the waiting room that is just triaging individuals that are coming through, and yours is not a high-risk case, apparently, just because you have back pain, and so they write you a prescription for some prescription-strength pain medication. Go fill it, find your family doctor tomorrow, and so on. So you go to the pharmacy, one of the 24-hour ones, and you get it filled, and you take some of that prescription pain medication, and over time it begins to take a little bit of the edge off of that pain. And but you still can't lay on your back. It's still uncomfortable. Yes, you got a couple of hours of sleep, but it's just there. And so now you're taking the over-the-counter medication, now you're taking the prescription pain medication, and it's a little better, but it's still there. And so you finally go in to see your doctor, and your doctor actually does an examination and discovers there's a reason why you have back pain. And the reason happens to be because you have a knife in your back. Did the pain medication fix the problem? Well, no, the pain medication didn't fix the problem. And in fact, the pain medication is not for the purpose of fixing the problem. The pain medication is there for the purpose of limiting the symptoms that you have associated with the problem. I'm not saying that we shouldn't have pain medication or that you should never use pain medication, but simply that the pain medication is not going to take care of the cause. It's simply going to take care of the manifestation, the symptom. Now, when we think of symptoms, symptoms are kind of like a fire alarm. And a fire alarm is there in order to help you know there is a problem. A fire alarm is part of the solution. It's not part of the problem. The problem is the fire. If you have a fire, it's helpful to have a fire alarm, right? And of course, if the fire alarm is going off, that means that there is a problem, but the fire alarm itself is not the problem. It's part of the solution. Now, let's say that you're sleeping at night and you want to get that beauty sleep, and that fire alarm starts going off and it's annoying and you can't sleep through it. And so you get up and you take a pillow and you put a pillow over the fire alarm. And now instead of, now it's, and so that's better. You might be able to sleep through that. But you can't stand there the whole time. So you get some duct tape and you tape down that pillow. And then you go back to sleep. Well, if you get burned up in the fire, whose fault is that? It's going to be your fault that you got burned up in the fire, because you turned off the fire alarm when it was there to let you know that there was a problem. So, yes, we have our symptoms. We have these various different things, and the symptoms have a good function. The symptoms are there to let you know something's wrong. Now, if you have a bad fruit and bad leaves on the tree, the problem lies deeper than that. Yes, you can pick off the bad fruit and you can pick off the bad leaves, but that's not ultimately going to fix the problem, because the problem is deeper. And what is it that the fruit and the leaves grow off of? Well, they grow off of the branches. And the branches represent our behaviors. And our behaviors are simple. It's our breathing, it's our drinking, it's our eating, it's these various different things that we have. And are our behaviors important? Well, sure they are. Absolutely. They are important. And the better you behave, or the more healthy behaviors you have, then the better health outcomes that you're going to have as well. All right? That's good. That's great. So we're starting to get deeper. But there's always a reason why you do what you do and why you behave the way that you do. But we'll get to that in a minute. The branches, if you have bad fruit and bad leaves, is it okay to prune the branches? Well, sure it is. Yeah, it's okay. But does pruning the branches fix the problem? No, pruning the branches doesn't fix the problem, because the problem is deeper than that. Because the branches don't grow by themselves, the branches grow off of the trunk. And the trunk represents our needs. You and I need oxygen. We need water. We need food. These are some of the different needs that we have. And we need what we need because we are what we are. You see, it's what you are that determines what you need. Since you are a human, then you need oxygen. If you were a plant, you would need water. You would need carbon dioxide. If you are a human, you need fruit. If you were a plant, you would need dirt, and so on, right? So what you are determines what you need. And everything that you need comes from outside of you, and if it remains outside of you, you die. You only live if it's brought inside of you. And so the oxygen, if the oxygen remains at your nose and it stays there, well, you're going to die. You can only live when it comes in, and now it becomes a part of you. And the food, or the water, I should say, the water, if it stays at your lips, you're going to die. It's only when you drink it and it comes in and it becomes a part of you that you can live by it. And so everything that we need comes from outside of us, and everything that we need must be brought inside of us in order for us to live. You need oxygen, but the oxygen doesn't blow into you. You have to breathe. And you need water, but the water doesn't squirt into you. You have to drink. And you need food, and the food doesn't crawl down your throat, hopefully. You need to eat. So everything must first take what it needs, and then it gives it away. You might say, well, why does it have to give it away? Well, let me ask you this. How big would you be if you kept every bite of food you ever ate? How big would you be if you kept every swallow of liquid that you ever drank? And how big would you be if you kept every breath of air that you ever breathed? Well, you would be pretty huge. You're not that big. You use some and incorporate some of it, and then you pass things along. And even what you incorporate, that's going to be passed along eventually, because your cells replace themselves periodically and so on, and that gets broken down and so on, and it eventually gets eliminated. So everything that you take, you're eventually going to give. That's how we function. Now, your behaviors are there in order to supply your needs. You breathe because you need oxygen. You drink because you need water. You eat because you need food. Right? So that's how it goes. That's the way we function. But and a trunk, if the tree has problems and it has bad fruit and bad leaves, do you fix the trunk? Well, no, not really. You don't do anything with the trunk, and you can't really do anything with your needs. They're fixed. It doesn't change. But the trunk doesn't grow from itself. Where does the trunk grow from? It grows from the roots. That's right. And the roots represent our beliefs. Now you're getting underground. You don't necessarily know what an individual believes until you discuss with them. You talk with them. You ask them questions. Then you get to understand what is below what they believe, right? What's below ground. And what you believe is important because what you believe drives how you behave. For example, if you believe that you need Coca-Cola, what are you going to do? Well, you're going to drink Coca-Cola. So it will drive, your belief will drive your behavior. So you believe that you need it, you're going to drink it. But do you actually need it? Do you need Coca-Cola? Can you live without Coca-Cola? Well, sure, then it's not a need. Now, Coca-Cola does have things that you need. It does. Most of Coca-Cola is water, and you need water. And most of Coca-Cola, or a good portion of Coca-Cola, is sugar. And sugar is part of the food that you grow, that you use to live by. And so, yes, an individual could live for a while off of Coca-Cola, but if you keep drinking it, you'll find out there's going to be some adverse effects associated with it. I was about to say, sorry, Coca-Cola, but I guess I'm not going to say that. But it's going to be problematic because it's not what you need. So if your beliefs do not match your needs, then your behaviors are not going to supply what you need, and you're going to end up with bad fruit and bad leaves. But if what you believe matches your needs, then you're going to behave in a way that will supply your needs, and you'll end up with healthy fruit and healthy leaves. Great. But if you have a tree that has bad fruit and bad leaves, it's diseased, then what are you going to fix about the tree? You might say the roots, but have you really dealt with the roots? Or what are you dealing with? You deal with the soil. And the soil represents our sources. So if the tree has a problem, it really has a problem of its source. And the sources either are going to have too little, the source can have too much, or the source can have the wrong stuff, or the source can have exactly what's needed. And the problems that you develop with the bad fruit and bad leaves is if you have too little. You got too little water in your soil. You have too much water, now you get waterlogged in the soil. Or you have the wrong stuff. You've been watering the tree with diesel. Oh, you mean that doesn't work? No, it doesn't work. Right? So, in order for you to have a healthy tree with healthy leaves and healthy fruit, you need to have a good source that has exactly what you need. You need to have beliefs that match with your needs. Then your behaviors are going to supply what you need, and then you're going to end up with healthy fruit and healthy leaves, and you don't have to have all the symptoms. Isn't that nice? Yeah, it's nice. Now, are there other things that you need? Do you need love? Do you? I've been around the world. I've asked audiences all over the place. I've asked thousands, 10,000s of people. And except for two 14-year-old males who said that they didn't need love, and of course they were looking for attention, which is a component of love, I haven't met anybody that didn't need love. We all need love. As human beings, we need love, just like we need food and water and oxygen. So I need oxygen, so I breathe. I need water, so I drink. I need food, so I eat. I need love, so I... What do I do in order to bring in the love? Well, let's imagine that you were having a bad day. I mean, like a really bad day. And in having your bad day, you came home and you stopped at the mail. And there was a letter. It was a handwritten letter, and you noticed that it was returned addressed to a certain individual, and that was a good individual to be, for you to receive a letter from. And you open up the letter, and the letter says, "Dear," and they have your name. It says, I'm thinking about you and can't get you off of my mind, and I'm thinking about the last time we spent together and looking forward when we can spend time together in the future. And it goes on with all this mushy stuff, and it says, "Love so-and-so" at the bottom. How do you feel now? Now, before you were feeling bad. How do you feel now? Are you feeling kind of loved? Yeah. Well, let me ask you this. How much love was in the letter? How much love was in the ink? How much love was in the paper? Where do you find the love? Where did it come from? And how did you get it? What happened? Well, I'll tell you this. What that paper or what that letter contains is information. It contains information. Now, the paper did not originate the information, and the ink did not originate the information. It was an individual with a mind that originated the information. And that information was communicated from the mind through the nerves, through the muscles, and the bony structure to a pen or a pencil or something like that, and then that was placed on the paper. And we have been taught that this shape means this letter, and these letters have mean this word, and this word has this meaning. And these words put together have this meaning, and what you have done is you have taken the information that's on the paper, you have extracted the thought from it, right? You have interpreted it to mean love, and that they love you. And you have accepted that, you have believed it. Now it's yours. That's how you take in the love. You need oxygen, so you breathe. You need water, so you drink. You need food, so you eat. You need love, so you think. It's a process of thinking. It's a thought process, a processing of information that you determine to mean love that brings the love in. And when it does so, now you have the love. Just like eating is a process of bringing in the food so that you can now have the food and now you can live by the food. So this is how it works. This is where it goes. Now, in regards to love and sources, can people be the source of the love that you need? Can people be the source of the love that you need? It's a question that I'm going to ask, but I'm not going to answer it. We're gonna answer it in future sessions that we spend together, and so you're gonna have to keep watching and come back for that. But it's something that we need to think about, we need to consider, and we need to understand. Now, we can recognize when it comes to function, how things work, that everything that functions is governed by law. There's always law that governs everything that functions. And all laws that govern function are unchangeable. I mean, we think of things like thermodynamics and laws of motion and gravity and other things of that nature. Now, our understanding of those laws can change over time, but the law itself doesn't change. It remains. And proper function is maintained while we remain inside of the law, and dysfunction is the result of getting outside of the law. Right? That's where dysfunction happens. So when we consider law, we need to consider that there is a fundamental law of all nature. And this fundamental law of all nature has two components to it. That is that nothing in nature exists or functions from itself. That means that everything in nature is dependent upon resources, material, power, something in order to exist and to function, and all of that power, materials, and resources came from outside of itself and then is needed in order for it to exist and function. And the second part is that nothing exists or functions for itself. So that means that all things take that power, the material and the resources, and use it and then do something with it. Everything, right? Everything in nature does this. And to put in a simple way, everything in nature takes in order to give. Right? Everything in nature takes in order to give. And this law, this fundamental law, is the foundation of, for example, thermodynamics. And thermodynamics tells us that all energy necessary for a system to function must come from outside that system. And this law is also the foundation of cause and effect. And cause and effect tells us that every effect must have a cause, and every cause must produce an effect. Because the effect does not produce its own power, its own materials and resources. That power, material, and resources came from outside of itself. So the effect doesn't produce itself. There's something else that does. So therefore there's cause and there's effect. Right? And this law I call the law of life. Right? It's the law of life. And because everything operates by law, and because there is a cause for disease and the symptoms that an individual has, if you treat the disease or the condition with something that does not take away the cause, you treat it with something that does not take away the cause, and the cause is still there, but you have removed the effect, then the cause must, by law, manifest itself in another effect. So any treatment that does not remove the cause must at some point and some way produce a side effect. Just keep that in mind. Keep that in mind. Now let's go on a journey. We're going to go on a journey, hopefully down the road, not off the road. And the road is going to represent health. And on the road is proper function, and it's comfortable. That's nice. I like comfort. Everybody does. And in order to remain on the road, we have various different needs that need to be met, like oxygen and water and food and warmth and so on. And what defines, well, when I get off the road, there's going to be dysfunction and discomfort. Right? That's going to be off the road, dysfunction and discomfort. And what defines whether I am on the road or not is law. Right? Law is going to define whether I'm there. You have an upper limit of body temperature, a lower limit of body temperature. You have an upper limit of water, lower limit of water, an upper limit of sodium, and lower limit of sodium, and so on. And you need to be within those limits, and now you can function well, things are comfortable, and so on. But once you get outside of that, it doesn't work so well. So let's use warmth as our example, because it's an easy one for us to interact with and to feel and to experience. Sodium's not as easy for us to feel, but let's run with warmth. What happens if your body temperature goes above the law of your body temperature? How do you feel? Well, you feel hot. That's right. You feel hot. And is hot comfortable or is it uncomfortable? It's uncomfortable. So now you have discomfort associated with your hot, right? And that discomfort is there to let you know something is wrong so that you can do something about it. And so now when you feel hot, you have symptoms. You have symptoms, and the symptoms let you know something's wrong. And now you have a motivation, a signal, a trigger, something to let you know you got to do something about it. What's something that you do? Well, you start sweating. You might, you might unzip. You might fan yourself. You might take off layers. You might drink something cold. Something in order to get your temperature back into the normal range so that you can feel warm again. You can feel comfortable. That's what we're looking for when we have symptoms, is we're trying to get away from the symptoms so that we can have comfort. What happens if I go in the opposite direction? And so now my temperature goes down below the law that governs the body temperature. Well, now I have symptoms on that side, but this time I don't feel hot. I feel cold. I feel cold. And the cold is there in order to let me know that there's a problem, so I need to do something about it in order to get back within the law. And what do I do about it? Well, I cover up. I drink something warm. I turn the heat on. I do something in order to get my body temperature back up, and when it gets in the law, then there's comfort again. Great. So the symptoms on either side of the road are kind of like the rumble strips. They're like the rumble strips on the side of the road. They're there to let you know something's wrong and you're getting off the road. So they have a good function, even though it's not good when you have the symptoms. It's like the fire alarm. The fire alarm is part of the solution, not part of the problem, but it shows you that the problem is there. Now, what happens if I don't stop at symptoms? What if I keep going and my body temperature goes up above just being hot? Where am I going to get to next? Well, you very well might get to disease. Might get to disease. And now disease, it's not only does it feel bad, it is bad. I mean, it's worse. So now you have heat exhaustion, you have heat stroke, you got a horrible headache, you're feeling nauseous, your tongue is stuck to the roof of your mouth, your lips are dried, cracked, and maybe even have been bleeding a little bit, and you just feel so uncomfortable, and you can't thermoregulate. You can't regulate your temperature anymore, and so your temperature's up, and you feel like you're baking, and you're going to die. Well, if you feel that bad, you might be willing to do something dramatic in order to fix the problem, or allow or accept that others might do something dramatic to you in order to fix the problem, right? Yes. I have a friend that worked in the military as a physician, and in a particular base that he was working at in the United States, it was in the southeastern United States. In the southeastern United States, there's a lot of heat and there's a lot of humidity. And when the humidity is high and the heat is high and it's above body temperature, and you go out with your army fatigues and your pack and everything, and you're marching, you can sweat all you want to. You're not going to cool your body temperature down because it can't evaporate. And if environmental temperature is about body temperature, you can't thermoregulate. You can't control your body temperature very well. And so temperatures start going up. And then if you dehydrate and you're not drinking, it's just going to continue to go up. And they'd have soldiers that would just fall out of line. And they'd, and then the paramedics, medics there in the military, they'd go check them out, feel that they're hot, measure their temperature. And sometimes their temperature is, way elevated, critical range. And they had a building, where they could rush them to. They strip them down, stick a thermometer where you don't want thermometers anyways, but to measure core temperature, and then throw them into an ice tub, a tub with water and a bunch of ice in it, and then start some IVs with IV fluid running through that's chilled so that they can decrease their temperature quickly. Now, if you only felt hot, you might not submit to the ice bath and the IVs and the thermometer probe up where you don't want it to go and other things like that. But if it gets really bad, you might be very grateful for them doing that in order to save you. So the farther you go off the road, the more uncomfortable it gets, and the greater discomfort is there to be a greater motivation to get you to come back. And it happens on the other side as well. If your body temperature goes down below the normal range, there's going to be disease, frostbite, chilblains, other things like that. Very painful and very problematic, and you need to do something about it right away in order to not go beyond there. And what happens when I go beyond there? What's next? Death on either side. You go far enough away from the law, you're eventually getting to death. And yes, there's a gray zone before that called the point of no return. You're still alive, but you aren't getting back. And I've interacted with patients that are in that case many times in the emergency department. They're still alive, but we're not getting them back. All right. And not too long after that, and then they're dead. Well, let's not go down that morose side, but let's recognize that there is a law, and this is how the law functions. And there's a law for everything that you need, and it functions this way. But remember, we talked about needs before, and we acknowledge that there's another need that we have, and there's a need for love. So is it possible that there's a law that governs love? And that as long as we're within that law, things can be healthy, function properly, and be comfortable. But if we get outside of that law, there could be symptoms, disease, and even death. Something for us to think about, chew on for a little bit. So, with our analogy here, we recognize that health is proper function, which is the effect of staying within the law, and disease is dysfunction, which is the effect of going outside of the law, and symptoms and disease, well, they're like the fire alarm and the rumble strips. They're good. Now, I'm not saying good that you have it. Not saying that at all. But their function is a good function because their function is there to let you know something's wrong. Something's wrong. So it's a good function. In considering disease and considering these different things, we need to also consider the law of cause and effect. I mean, you're aware that there is a law of cause and effect, of course. Yes, good. So we recognize that every effect must have a cause. Because again, it doesn't produce itself. The power, material, resources that come from outside of it in order for it to function must come from the cause. The effect doesn't produce itself. And every cause must produce an effect. It doesn't just exist on itself. It does something. Right? Everything takes in order to give. And so it can't stop that. So if the cause is there, then it's got to give something, do something. And if the effect is present, then that means that the cause is also present. Because when you remove the cause, the effect must go away. Right? When you remove the cause, the effect must go away. And no effect can produce itself because, again, it's dependent upon power, materials, resources outside of itself. So you will never find an effect without a cause. Now, you will not find the effect and the cause in the same place because the cause always comes from outside of where the effect is. But anytime that there's an effect, there has to be a cause. That means there is no such thing as chance, and there is nothing that is truly random. Random is simply our inability to predict what is coming next or what the outcome will be. And so that's just a limitation from our standpoint. It's not actually a true thing that exists. So, interestingly enough, if you talk to your provider, in the healthcare system, you talk to your doctor, you talk to your nurse, you talk to your whoever, and you talk to them about your disease. I can't tell you how many times I've heard or I've had patients that have told me that they've talked to their doctor, asked them what's going on. They say, well, I guess it's just dumb luck. Dumb luck? Really? Yes, because our healthcare system, and in fact science in a way, very interestingly enough, believes in chance. More so our healthcare system. Now, if you get really down to basic science, now they know there's always a cause for everything, and they're looking for the cause, and they're looking for the law that's behind it because you have reproducible results. And with reproducible results, there has to be some kind of consistency, some kind of law that's there. But in many ways, especially in our healthcare system, we believe that there is chance and that you can have your disease or your condition or whatever simply by chance. What do you think? Okay. Now, if we get things mixed up and we get them backwards, and we believe that the cause is the effect, and therefore that the effect is the cause, then we will never understand how something functions. For example, in this illustration that's here, you can see that we have an ambulance down here in the valley with a bunch of broken cars, and you have a road with no lines, no markings, no signs, no rail, nothing to protect it. But the solution is to put an ambulance down in the valley to try to then rescue the casualties that go over the edge. Well, that would be because of a misunderstanding of cause and effect. This would be to say that, okay, the cause of the damage is landing at the bottom, so let's fix what happens when we land at the bottom. Or let's try to treat what happens when we land at the bottom. Not recognizing that the cause comes up here where there are the potential protections to keep an individual from going down in that direction. Right? So we will always try to correct problems the wrong way when we have cause and effect turned around the wrong way. Right? If we have them backwards, then we're going to correct things the wrong way. And we will never fix the problem, and we will never find the cure. And so therefore, we must understand cause and effect correctly. We must. Because that's the only way that we're going to come to a proper conclusion, is if we understand cause and effect correctly. And this is important. And when I was going through medical school, I didn't see this. I didn't know this. I didn't understand this. In fact, when I was going through medical school, one of our professors, one of our main professors going through medical school, he said that about 50% of what we're teaching you right now is wrong. We just don't know which 50%. Yeah. And we're told that science is the continual pursuit of truth. And that sounds like a good thing. It's a continual pursuit of truth. But is that not also a tacit acknowledgement that they will continually not have truth? Right? That's a continual pursuit of truth. That means that you continually don't have it. All right. Anyway, some thoughts from there. But yes, our system gets things backwards. And so it pursues things backwards. And then it pursues the ambulance in the valley rather than fixing the things up higher. So in order to get to the cause, I need to know what the first domino is in the chain of dominoes. And I need to know what happened to that first domino. That's going to be where the cause is. I don't need to know what happens with all of the other dominoes. Those are simply effects. And I would propose to you that our typical understanding of health and our typical understanding of disease is where we have taken dominoes that are further down the line and we've said, okay, well, yes, this domino comes first and then this domino comes next, so this one is the cause for that one. And so, but we don't follow the dominoes all the way back up to the first domino. And so we still don't know what is the cause. What is the first domino? What causes that first domino to fall? And then everything else being an effect from there. That's the question, and that's where we want to get to. So here's a cell. You and I have 50 to 100 trillion cells in our body, and we have over 250 different types of cells. And each cell has a particular type of function. Every cell kind of functions like a factory, and of course a factory produces a product, and sometimes the cells produce numerous products, numerous products. But each different type of cell will have amongst those cells, let's say that there's 1,000,000 cells of a particular type, those 1,000,000 cells will be producing the same types of products, right? Because that's the type of cell that it is. And so it will have a particular type of function because that's what that particular type of cell does. And your function in your body as a whole is dependent upon the function of the individual cells and the individual types of cells that you have in your body. And if you lose a particular type of cell in your body, you are going to lose that function in your body as a whole, right? Yeah. Now, an example of that that we might be more familiar with is type 1 diabetes. And in that case of type 1 diabetes, you have an individual who has an autoimmune condition, typically young. It usually begins in childhood. Sometimes, 3, 4 years of age, sometimes 7, 8 years of age. Sometimes it actually happens in adult years. But anyways, type 1 diabetes, you have an autoimmune condition, and the immune system starts killing off what are called beta islet cells. And beta islet cells are a type of cell that are in the pancreas. And those beta islet cells produce a particular type of chemical that is not produced anywhere else. And what type of chemical is that? Or what's the name of that chemical? Yeah, it's insulin. So insulin is produced by the beta islet cells. It's not produced anywhere else. And so what happens is when the immune system starts killing off those beta islet cells, you have fewer and fewer and fewer cells to be able to produce insulin. The insulin levels go down and down. And what insulin is supposed to do, what it does, is the insulin, when it comes to the different cells, like the muscle cells, the fat cells, the liver cells, and so on, it attaches to the surface of the cell. And when it attaches to the surface of the cell, it opens channels through the cell membrane so that sugar can come in from the outside of the cell into the cell so that the cell can have it to use for fuel. And so if your insulin levels go down, then you have less and less sugar that you can bring into the cell, and the cell begins to starve, but the sugar increases in the bloodstream. So an individual who dies from diabetes, they don't die because of high blood sugar. They die because the sugar can't get into the cells, and the cells die for lack of fuel. All right, so that's what type 1 diabetes is, and insulin and some of those different functions. All right, so you have somebody that has type 1 diabetes. If it knocks out the beta islet cells, well, you can't produce any insulin, and you're not going to continue to live because insulin is necessary for life. You're not going to live if you don't take insulin, what we call exogenously, so from the outside, so injecting insulin, and so on. Well, I say, praise God, that there's insulin, and that individuals who can't produce their own insulin can get insulin and can continue to live. That's great. And all right, well, hey, I'm glad it's there. Glad it's there. Now, when we consider cause and effect, and we consider it in relation to the body and how things happen in the body, for example, like disease processes, we recognize that, again, when a cause is in place, it will immediately begin to produce an effect. When the cause is in place, it will immediately begin to produce an effect. But it may take time, and it may take a long time, for the effect to become large enough in order for it to be noticed. It might take time. So let's take as an example the pancreas again and those beta islet cells. I don't know how many beta islet cells that you have, but we're just going to imagine that you have 20 billion beta islet cells. It is generally believed that you need to lose a half of a cell population before you start having symptoms associated with its deficiency. So you need to lose half of your liver cells before you start manifesting liver failure, half of your kidney cells before you start manifesting kidney failure, and so on. So if you have a total of 20 billion beta islet cells, how many are you going to have to lose in order for you to start manifesting symptoms of the lack of insulin production? Well, of course, 10 billion. So how long is that going to take? Well, let's just imagine that you have a process that begins right now, and right now it begins to kill off 100 beta islet cells every second. So you lose 100, 200, 300, 400, 500, 600, 700, 800, and so on. It goes on like that, at that rate. Well, you would lose 6,000 cells in a minute. You would lose 360,000 cells in an hour. You would lose 8.6 million cells in a day. You would lose 60.5 million cells in a week. You would lose 260 million cells in a month. And you would lose 3.2 billion cells in a year. And at that rate, it would take you 3 years and 2 months between the cause being in place and the effect now getting big enough in order for it to manifest. Now, I'm not saying this is how it actually works. It can take off a lot faster than that. But I'm just giving this as an example to show us that it can take time between the cause being in place and then the effect finally manifesting. But if you want to know and you want to find the cause of your disease, if you want to find the cause of your disease, it must meet this criteria. That, some diseases are faster, some are slower, some of it's seconds, minutes, or hours. Between the cause being in place and the effect notice, sometimes it's years or even decades. So when we're looking for the cause, it must meet this criteria. The cause must be in place before the effect is noticed. So when I'm dealing with patients and I want to know what's going on and I want to get to the bottom of it and discover what the cause is, then I'm always asking, when did you first have your symptoms? When did you first have symptoms associated with this condition or that condition? Because that becomes my start point. And from that point, so let's say that you were 25 years old when you first had symptoms associated with this thing or this condition or whatever. Well, then I know that the cause had to be in your life by the time you were 25 or before the time you were 25. But if it came when you were 38 years old, that's not the cause. Right? It's not the cause. But I'm also looking for something that was not just in your life back then, but something that is still in your life now, because if the effect, i.e. the disease, is present, then the cause is also going to be present. So that means the cause had to be in place before you had the first symptom, and the cause must still be there while you continue to have the symptoms. Because if the cause is removed, the effect must begin to go away. Now, it can take time for the effect to go away, right? That can happen. For example, if you have an individual that has cancer and their cancer has, grown and progressed and so on, if you find the cause and the cause is removed, well, it might take time. It might take, in some people, some individuals that I know of, it took a matter of days to a few weeks for the cancer to resolve and be gone and have no evidence of it on scans and so on. Other individuals, it might take months or so for it to go away. But the moment the cause is removed, the condition ceases to progress. Right? As long as once the cause is removed, the condition ceases to progress. It will then begin to regress, but there can be the case where you have had so much damage that there's not regrowth in that particular area. For example, let's say, for instance, you have been drinking and for many years, and now the liver is damaged, and a good portion of the liver is replaced by scar tissue. Now you have cirrhosis of the liver. If you stop the cause, and the cause is removed, then the progressive destruction of the remaining liver cells would stop. But you wouldn't necessarily regrow all of the liver cells that had been replaced with scar tissue previously. And so you may have a residual effect associated with the cause, but the condition should not continue to progress after you remove the cause. Got it? All right. Now, every function in nature needs at least two elements. It needs something that generates or enables the function, and it needs like an electrical impulse. Think of a gas or a diesel engine. And it needs something that sustains or perpetuates that function, like fuel. So that's true for everything. Every living system. I don't care if it's a plant, I don't care if it's an animal, whatever it is, it has to have something, an electrical impulse to get the function going, and it has to have something that perpetuates or continues or sustains the function, and that would be the fuel. And so your cells, they need the fuel, and they need what we'll call the spark. You can call it various different terms. That's not a very accurate term, just trying to describe the idea. Right? So your cells need the fuel, and your cells need the spark. They need both. And according to the fundamental law, everything in nature takes in order to give. And so it's the cell itself that must take of the fuel and must take of the spark that's made available to it. But if it's not available, it can't take it. So it must have the fuel that's available, it must have the spark that's available, and it takes it, but it doesn't take it to keep it to itself. It takes it so that it can give. And so again, every cell functions like a factory. And some cells produce autocrines, paracrines, hormones, cell adhesion molecules, cell signaling molecules, all sorts of stuff, all sorts of products that it produces. And so it takes in the fuel, it takes in the spark, it rearranges the chemicals, because that's the fuel, and it rearranges those and then produces a product from those rearranged chemicals. Right? And so the cell, of course, is dependent upon fuel, and the fuel is the oxygen. The fuel is the water. The fuel are the nutrients. In other words, the fuel is chemical. The fuel of the cell is chemical. It's made up of chemicals. And those chemicals are going to come in through a system. So you have the respiratory system, you're going to breathe, bring in the oxygen. Digestive system, you're going to drink and eat and bring in the food and so on. And those chemicals are brought in, and now they're made available to every part of the body through the bloodstream. And what happens if you have a blockage in the bloodstream? And with that blockage, well, if you can't get the fuel to the cells, then the cells are not going to be able to function like they're supposed to. They're not going to be able to function like they're supposed to. They have to have the fuel in order to survive, in order to work. Now, those chemicals, that fuel, needs to be at a certain level. There needs to be a certain level of those chemicals that are there. And if you have a good concentration, a good level of those chemicals, then the cells can extract exactly what they need. But if there's too little or there's too much, then you're going to end up with a problem. Right? And now you're going to have a deficiency, or you're going to have a toxicity, and that's not going to work so well. Right? Now, that's the fuel. Where does the spark come from? Because again, the cells need the spark. They need the electricity. They need the electrical activity in order to help them in that function. So where does that come from? Well, the laws of thermodynamics tell us that all energy necessary for a system must come from outside of that system. And so the spark must come from outside of the cell that needs the spark. The fuel needs to be made available to the cell, but the spark also needs to be made available to the cell as well. Where does that come from? Well, think about it. That's a hint. All right. Well, the cells don't just function on fuel. They have positively and negatively charged particles that they bring inside and outside of the body, outside of the cell. It creates a voltage difference across the cell. When those charged particles move across the cell membrane, it's called current. There's resistance across there. Voltage, current, resistance, that's electricity. Where does that come from? It comes from the brain, from the central nervous system. And it is brought to the various different cells of the body through the nerves. And how the brain works or interacts with the rest of the body is you have electrical impulses that begin in the cortex of the brain. Those impulses are sent down to the central part of the brain, and it crosses to the other side. Then it goes down the brainstem through the spinal cord, and then it goes out through the nerves to the various different parts of the body, like the muscles and the digestive tract and your endocrine organs and so on. And it goes to all of these different areas of the body in order to control what's happening in those parts of the body. But also you have nerves that send information from the muscles, from the digestive tract, from the endocrine organs like your thyroid. And that's a picture of the thyroid. And that comes back and is sent back through those peripheral nerves, through the spinal cord, back up to the brain and to the cortex so that you can receive information from the body. And so the brain is receiving information from the body, it's sending information to the body, and it's controlling and regulating everything that happens in the body. And the question that I have for you is, where does the electrical activity come from the brain? Now, I'm not talking about the fuel. The brain has fuel, and the brain needs fuel, right? And it gets the fuel, of course, in glucose and the chemicals, the oxygen, water, and the nutrients, and so on. But where does the spark come from, right? The spark that gets it going, the spark that causes things to happen, that makes it so that the brain can control the rest of the things that happen in the body. Where does the spark come from? The laws of thermodynamics say that it must come from outside of itself. But from where? And so that's where we're going to leave off for today. With that question unanswered, it needs to be answered, but we're going to answer it at another time. Where is it that the brain gets its electrical activity to control all of its functions? We'll look at that next time.